Kawarata Kokoro Broken Minds is a short and extremely stylish whodunit adventure game / visual novel developed by LockedOn and released on home computers in November 2017, beginning this developer's commercial video game development career and Yamagata Private Detective Agency or Kawarata Kokoro series. At the time of recording, the series includes Broken Minds, 2 Lite novels included with Broken Minds that seem more like short stories, and an upcoming sequel entitled Broken Spirits. Because the story of Broken Minds occurs in November 1992, on itch.io, LockedOn lists the release date as November 2nd, 1992. This also accounts for the old-fashioned 4:3 aspect ratio. While 1992 is a little too early for Myst, the pre-rendered 3D environments also harken back to this style of adventure game, their detail, stiffness, and slight fuzziness dreamlike. Navigation can be somewhat confusing. Even after repetition, I never became confident which button click would warp my character to which part of the room, a familiar strangeness to fans of Myst-style adventure games. Not only glossing the game world and authenticity with 90s technology, Broken Minds feels at points like it might have come out in the 90s, though LockedOn admits in the commentary that this stems from limitations of the engine rather than a desire to replicate Myst. In an interesting contrast to this Myst-style world, most of Broken Minds is standard visual novel presentation, clicking through dialogue of barely animated PNG characters. The delightfully stylized, angular, and ugly cartoon people in a Myst-esque modern world lends Broken Minds a mixed media quality that one of the Logic Train minigames leans into with puppets. Based on the title and marketing that bills the video game as a psychological murder mystery, Broken Minds may appear to be a dark mystery adventure. While Broken Minds is also this, the cartoon vibe extends deeper than the graphics. The writing and action are heightened and ridiculous, every character at least as much of a wacky weirdo as they are callous and selfish. A more realistic, or more typical anime style, would struggle to sell the tone, for the story is dark and takes its characters and stakes seriously, at the same time the script, as often as not, is comedic. From the night of 1st November to the morning of 3rd November 1992, the player controls Noa Karada, a depressed, lonely 20-something, specifically 21, who, though quiet, has a rather loud style. Noa wears 2 bows and 3 stars in her hair. For that, unironically, big respect. One night, while Noa's abusive parents, Hiroki and Noriko, are visiting her apartment, a rabbit-masked stalker known as the Orphan attacks the building. From here, Noa hires the Yamagata Private Detective Agency, a group of 3 detectives, Takuma, Ume, and Yuzuki, to solve the case, which spirals from failed arson to serial murder. A strange dynamic emerges between Noa and the YPDA detectives, who turn out to be heartless money grubbers, both extremely selfish and condescending, but also incompetent and woefully unprofessional. Among other things, the chief investigator Takuma forces Noa to do most of the investigation, and Ume admits that, to explain crimes, she simply invents scenarios as real-life fanfiction. All the while, the YPDA aims both to solve the case, but also to dig up enough dirt to extort Noa in order to fund the acquisition of spa visits, meat, and a Super Famicom. Yuzuki, the nominal leader, actually seems proficient at her job and capable of some empathy, and is the exception at the YPDA. This may account for why Ume and Takuma pass up no opportunity to insult Yuzuki, and also, when convenient for their tortured deductions, ignore her findings. Aside from navigating the environments, the main interaction in Broken Minds is choosing Noa's emotions, answering multiple-choice questions, and the dreaded Logic Train. The Logic Train is Broken Minds' chief gameplay innovation, a series of minigames in which the player must activate or break stations along a metaphorical railway to reach Noa's goal, disproving or proving another character's assertion depending on the story route. As a tutorial anime Noa tells the player, it looks complicated because it is. The Logic Train connects to one of the main narrative through lines, Noa arguing against the detective's speculation. So the logic train helps the player step into Noah's shoes and encourages logically picking apart the detective's frequently illogical deductions. Alas, instead of steps in a deep argument or glimpses of Noah's psychology, the logic train comes off as a chain of half-baked time wasters. Different minigames correspond to different objectives. The Wheel of Fallacies is the most frequent and time-consuming minigame. The player moves through a series of 3 fallacious arguments, and by clicking the corresponding icons from among the 8 that circle the magenta wheel, must select the fallacies contained in the argument before spinning the wheel. If the player has selected the correct fallacies for every argument, spinning the wheel activates the station, completing the minigame. If the player has not, the wheel lands on either win or lose. Losing resets the fallacies corresponding to one of the 3 arguments, or removes the descriptions of the fallacies, punishing players who haven't yet memorized LockedOn's iconography. Winning may indicate one correct or one incorrect fallacy, or restore the descriptions of the fallacies. The issue here is that the Wheel of Fallacies is as much a guessing game as a test of logical reasoning. Broken Minds doesn't consider certain fallacies as applying to certain arguments, even when they definitely do. The tutorial acknowledges that the fallacies may overlap closely enough that the process of elimination, rather than reasoning, is the surest path to victory. The Wheel of Fallacies might have functioned better with fewer fallacies to choose from. The other logic train minigames are so breezy, they feel out of place beside the Wheel of Fallacies. One of them is a guessing minigame that involves reading a line of text that mentions sensations. The player then clicks on segments of a brain that might correspond to these sensations, until the player has chosen the 2 somewhat arbitrary sections of the brain that complete the minigame. Another, with arresting visuals, involves arranging dolls of the characters in a diorama to reenact crime scenes. Unfortunately, the directions in this puppet theater minigame are unclear enough that it, too, collapses into what feels like guessing. Looking online, it seems enough other people struggled to clear the first puppet theater segment that LockedOn broadened the minigame's win state. The lie minigame demonstrates the logic Noah invents to fabricate a claim. The player selects a series of steps in a flowchart of Noah's false claim, and clicks the center to see how many align with the correct answer. While easy, the minigame is unintuitive because the player isn't privy to the lie Noah wants to tell. The final minigame is a reading comprehension quiz in which the player materializes some scenario by clicking through the correct descriptions of an item often irrelevant to the reasoning process, such as noting what a car is made out of. Who are you calling lazy, Noah? I got to an ending without once using easy mode. I have the badge to prove it. I'm a master detective. LockedOn received enough negative feedback regarding the logic train that a later update allows the player to choose to play Broken Minds in one of 2 modes, Casual Sleuth and Master Detective. Master Detective is the original intended experience with the logic train, while Casual Sleuth replaces the logic train with simple multiple-choice quizzes that can be answered in mere seconds. Seeing little value to the logic train despite the added interactivity, I only went with Master Detective on my first playthrough. I do recommend trying it at least once, because the true guilty ending implies the logic train has been a more physical process than it appears, such that without the context of the minigames, some of the imagery in this ending would seem random. The minigames involve cool visuals and concepts, but in execution prove paradoxically both overcomplicated and too simple. This principle of flashy, appealing presentation that misses the mark on application touches all of Broken Mind's flaws, including the very tutorials, whose lengthy narration by an anime version of Noah distracts from the information, leaving the player more confused than a practical but boring textual explanation might. Her jokes make the tutorial text more engaging, but also less clear. The player cannot make their own argument in the logic train, but instead must bring the train to Noah's own pre-decided conclusion. In Broken Minds, aside from walking around environments and clicking for Noah's descriptions, the element of player choice comes in taking or not taking certain actions. The first of these is deciding at certain points whether Noah will interact with other characters using bleak, nice, or psychopath responses, represented by 3 emoji. Which flavors the player selects at these junctures has a tremendous effect on Noa's character, and so the conclusions the logic train sequences are supposed to reach. Will the player need to disprove Reiwa's delusions during her mental health episode, or remove any doubt the delusions are false? For example, if the player chooses bleak, and then at the next opportunity bleak again, Noa's personality is set to bleak and the player embarks on the bleak route. But if the player chooses bleak and nice, Noa's personality is set to expiator, and the player has entered the expiator route. Noa may go through the story depressed and traumatized, or as a conniving, gleeful liar. In addition to the player's choices regarding what evidence to inspect, and whether they correctly answer Takuma's questions, these personality choices lead to a whopping 24 possible endings, 4 for each personality. This number overwhelms, but regardless of Noa's personality, Broken Minds offers only 2 primary routes, guilty and innocent, each of which passes through mostly identical plot beats. Despite the substantial content overlap, the differences are meaningful. What on one route is a twist ending is, on another, the opening setup. Some endings leave the impression of a black comedy with an unsatisfying conclusion, while others are tragic, featuring Noa as a victim of the vicious YPDA, or horror stories of Noa's delusions and inability to find compassion from others. In addition, after the player has seen at least one of each emotional route's 4 possible endings, a new game triggers one of 2 possible true endings, the guilty true ending and the innocent true ending, depending on the last route the player was on before starting a new game. For completionists, reaching all 4 possible endings for each personality also unlocks a brief persona story in the extras menu. Viewed together, the persona stories tell an extra bit of narrative about Noa's childhood. Though these horrible bastards and their logical or illogical deductions are entertaining, the writing is not so rich, and more importantly, most of the personality routes not so different as to warrant this level of retreading. Playing through the majority of Broken Minds 7 times seems a bit much, even with the skip feature. Yes, repeated dialogue can be skipped through in seconds, but the player still has to complete identical point-and-click sections again and again. At least if there's an option to skip them, I missed it. This design also retroactively weakens the drama. In many visual novels, despite overlap, different story routes are substantially different from each other, involving different characters, different scenes, and so on. In contrast, in Broken Minds, if Noa's largely identical actions can correspond to vastly different motivations, they seem vacuous. On the first playthrough, Noa's rabbit nightmare on the night of 2nd November struck me with surreal suggestiveness and dread. But when I discovered that the scene, exactly identical, carries different meanings depending on Noa's personality, it seemed instead to mean nothing at all. Another issue is that since each potential personality will follow the same sequence of events, sometimes Noa's motivations are incoherent. On the innocent route, I don't buy that Psychopath Noa would strenuously argue against Uzumaki as the culprit, though in other routes I also do not accept that Noa would take Uzumaki's side from his sheer awfulness. In addition, while the story is by no means bad, and the moment-to-moment dialogue is snappy, charming, and occasionally raw, the overall narrative is cliché, relying on familiar tropes of a dangerous, mentally ill killer. LockedOn endeavors to balance this with a character on psychiatric meds who remains sympathetic and well-adjusted, by Broken Mind standards at least, and even allows the possibility, with proper care, of living a happy life despite mental illness. But milk outside a bag of milk outside a bag of milk, this is not. You can read a review of that one on my website or Medium, incidentally. I'll put a link in the description. It's good. I would prefer that I didn't sound so negative. Despite these significant issues, I enjoyed Broken Minds tremendously. From the sheer strength of its presentation, even the logic train awkwardness made me feel like I was overcoming a meaningful obstacle, immersing me in the story despite my irritation. Belying the small-scale production values, the small cast and limited setting of Broken Minds permit LockedOn, perhaps drawing from past experience drawing comics, to offer an impressive quantity of unique and jagged character illustrations and expressions, lending a cinematic flair to the entire video game. Watching Noa, Ume, Takuma, and Yuzuki's varied expressions as their images slide across a background between twitching black bars is more dynamic and interesting than simply staring at PNGs in a more standard visual novel presentation, even though this is effectively what's going on. From blocking and music alone, the detectives prove intimidating opponents even on routes where they're not particularly dangerous to Noa. The cartoony characters' many detailed, dramatic, and ugly expressions result in greater pathos than more subdued artwork could accomplish. Look how much nuance Noa's face conveys in this moment alone. A lesser illustrator would settle for just 1 or 2 facial expressions. An excellent soundtrack by freelancer Odd Till the End also does much to punch up the drama. Although Hiroki and Noriko are nasty and greedy to a point of dark comedy, the nightmarish music in Noa's apartment stokes dread of the dark night and makes her parents' visit feel like an assault by some monster, despite how cute and charming her living space is. In video games, like in film, strong music and visuals go a long way to elevating what otherwise might be a banal story, not to mention the sheer creative enthusiasm all the unique text and detailed presentation implies. Come at me, bro. And I must mention Noa herself. She is so cute. On my first playthrough, I wanted to kiss her on the cheeks and tell her everything would be okay, even though it probably wouldn't. Apparently people keep falling in love with Tifa, or whoever this is, but it's Noa who's stolen my heart. The rest of the Kawarita Kokoro series apparently doesn't involve Noa, beyond a few mentions in Broken Spiral that paint an even bleaker portrait of her than Broken Minds. The plot may prove somewhat trite, and the more interesting subject matter of Noa's biography remain unexplored due to the subservience of the cast to the whodunit. But the drama and tension the dynamic artwork and dark music introduce, and humor with which the dialogue spices this strange story, do much to elevate Broken Minds to an engaging little adventure game and promising start to a series. Because I recommend Broken Minds, I've avoided going into too much detail about the plot, though I'd be surprised if at least a few spoilers haven't been on screen at this point. So if you don't want spoilers, please go watch another one of my videos, or perhaps read that Milk Outside a Bag of Milk Outside a Bag of Milk review. Noa has a cartoonish and probably rather offensive version of dissociative identity disorder, though here easier to stomach because Noa is, after all, a cartoon character in a world of larger-than-life wackiness. Even when she's converting stolen anxiety medication into non-traceable poison to kill her father, Noa is so cute! Look at those flared nostrils! I grant she's occasionally not cute. Based on the guilty routes, most of the innocent routes, and the true guilty ending, after manipulation by the sadistic unlicensed therapist Uzumaki, Noa's psychopath and liar personalities execute an elaborate plot to murder her parents and Uzumaki, and then frame the latter to remove people she hates to give her a chance to bond with the detectives over a tragedy and so finally make friends. Most of Noa's personalities oppose this irrational plan, and one is entirely unaware of it, a deliciously tragic situation that transforms an otherwise gimmicky dialogue selection screen into the hinge on which the plot turns. The longing for connection to others as Noa's motivation also roots the bizarre situation to an emotional reality, an important grounding for an extreme story. Instead of friends, though, the YPDA turn out to be almost as terrible as Noa herself, particularly in Broken Spirals, which specifies that Takuma, Ume, and Yuzuki steal the bodies of Noa's parents to extract and sell their eyes and other organs. Even Reiwa turns Noa down for being so annoying. Look how sad Noa is. A situation sad and painful, but also ridiculous, achieves a compelling beauty. Instead of a Rashomon of different and often conflicting endings with wildly different Noahs, this one relatable in her timidity and isolation, and this other with a fiendish grin deciding whether or not she'll murder the detectives, the true guilty ending seems to recontextualize the different routes into coherence, possible outcomes of the same given initial circumstances as in most visual novels. However, the true innocent ending is surprisingly darker and poses an alternative scenario in which Uzumaki is the murderer after all. The player's choices retroactively determine what happened before the story as well. This could create a potentially more thought-provoking script, but instead of leaving both scenarios as equally possible outcomes, LockedOn weights the narrative toward Noa being the killer. The gameplay system is built around Noa's multiple personalities, and the true innocent ending still has psychopath and liar Noa planning to kill her parents and Uzumaki, but opting not to for no clear reason. Neither true ending adequately ties up every loose end, however. In the true guilty ending, how Noa could have known Hiroki would attempt mouth-to-mouth on Noriko stays unexplained. And in the innocent true ending, why Uzumaki fires at Noa's pillows remains unclear. In this conventional murder mystery focused on details, evidence, and deductions, these discrepancies leave the story feeling incomplete. Although the true guilty ending feels unearned because Noa's years-long journey to healing and self-acceptance happens entirely off-screen, seeing her happy was worth it, and might be closure enough. While many other endings see her change or lose her fashion, this happy one allows Noa to keep her distinctive look. Unironically, big respect. Hey there, this is just a reminder that if you like this video, please like it by hitting the thumbs up button. If you'd like to hear me talk about more things, you can subscribe to my channel, and you can also follow me on Twitter @MackerelPhones, or read some of the posts on my website, MackerelPhones.com. Links to both my Twitter and my website are in the video description. You can also check out my other channel, Mackerel Undercover.